All right, welcome everybody to tonight's class on broken promises, Kol Nidrei's message of hope. So I would like to start tonight's class off with a story. The story takes us back to World War II in Russia. There was a Chabad Chassid, his name was Zalman Bronstein. He was drafted to the Red Army during World War II, and many nights he spent sleepless, standing at his guard post, huddled in the trenches, night in, night out. One night after his long stay on guard, he comes back into the barracks. He enters the shower room. On his way to the shower, he hears another comrade, another soldier, whistling a famous army tune, but completely missing every key. And Baruch Zalman Bronstein was a pretty talented musician himself, and this irked him. So using his beautiful voice, he showed the man how the song is sang properly, hitting every note. And the man responds, he says, that voice should not be wasted out there in the battlefield. Next thing he knows, following morning, he's transferred to the Red Army Choir. They would sing and perform for soldiers that were weak, weary, and beaten. They would raise the morale amongst the other soldiers. And Zalman was really enjoying his new position. Until one day he finds out that they are scheduled to perform on the night of Yom Kippur. He wrestled with this dilemma night in and night out. Many sleepless nights debating what is he supposed to do? How can he perform on Yom Kippur, the holiest day of the year, the most solemn day of the year? And he's going to perform with these Russian soldiers. And he comes up with a plan that was satisfactory to him, and that would be he would feign sickness, something wrong with his throat. Came the morning of the concert, it's Erev Yom Kippur, and he starts motioning to his friends in the choir, the other performers, that there's something wrong with his throat. And every time he would start to talk, that resulted in convulsive fits of coughing, and they understood he was in no condition to perform. So that afternoon, when it was time for the performance, he sent them on without him. And he was thinking to himself, he's happy now, he has quiet time to himself, he's left alone. And he starts preparing himself mentally for the day of Yom Kippur, however he's going to be celebrating it in the barracks. In comes 3 high-ranking officials, and he thinks to himself, I'm busted. They're going to catch me. They're going to schlep me out of here. They're going to pull me down to the concert hall, and I'm done. They walk over to him. He's ready to confess. And they say to him, we are also Jewish soldiers. We would like you to sing for us and to give us a little bit of a taste of Yom Kippur, of what Yom Kippur used to be like. But he says to them, he says, how can I? If I start singing here, we'll get caught and they'll find out that I was faking the entire time. So one of them comes up with an idea and says, we're not too far from the woods. Let's go out to a nice clearing in the woods. And we'll do it over there. They all agreed. So the 4 men set out into the woods. They find a beautiful clearing. And Zalman starts with the heart-stirring Kol Nidrei melody. And he sings it once, twice, 3 times. At the end of 3 times, he doesn't even remember where he is anymore. He's completely transported to another world, a world where there is no war, a world where he forgets the loneliness and depression of war, a world where he forgets about the suffering around him. Takes him back to the old shtetl, to his father's shul, when times were good. It's as if time was standing still. When he finishes singing, he turns around and he sees these 3 husky men, these soldiers that were with him, and they're crying, bawling like babies. his songs, his melodies must have transported them as well. Now, when Zalman would tell this, later survives the war, he was one of the founding members of Kfar Chabad in Israel. And when he would tell over this story, he would say that that scene, that occurrence in the bathhouse, must have happened just for this opportunity to experience Yom Kippur in such a way. I think it's safe to say that the Kol Nidrei prayer, the prayer that opens up Yom Kippur, is probably one of the most famous Jewish prayers. But before we get to any questions, actually, I think we have the Chazan with us. Chazan Zaltzman, are you with us?
I am. Here we are.
We have the Chazan from Mequon, or the Chazan for Mequon, Wisconsin, currently in Atlanta. Am I right?
Right, back in Atlanta. Looking forward to coming right back. We'll be right back.
We can't wait for your return. If you can just give us a little bit of a taste of what Kol Nidrei is like and why it's such a stirring prayer.
Of course. Here we go. Kol Nidrei ve'yosorei ushvei v'charomei ve'koel Yom Kippur Kippurim Habaleinu Letoivo. Pleasure is mine. I'm listening. The story sounds fantastic, and I want to hear the class now.
All right, that was beautiful. You hear the melody, and it's heart-stirring, it's inspiring. But what's interesting is, as we're going to explore momentarily the actual text with the translation, it's actually just a lot of legal statements. And if that's the case, as we'll see momentarily, but if it's just a bunch of legal statements or legal declarations, what's going on over here? Why are we opening up the day of Yom Kippur with a legal declaration? Why are we singing it as if it's the most inspiring tune? Could you imagine if on Erev Pesach, the rabbi got up in front of the shul and he read out the document for selling the chametz, and he read it with a stirring prayer? Imagine someone reading an IOU note with a stirring prayer. What's going on over here? Let's take a look at the text. And you can see the text over here. It's all vows, prohibitions, oaths, consecrations, vows or equivalent terms that we may vow, swear, consecrate, or prohibit upon ourselves from this Yom Kippur until the next Yom Kippur, may it come upon for good. Regarding them all, we regret them henceforth. I don't know about you, but to me that doesn't sound very inspiring. Now, if you put a nice tune to it, the tune is beautiful. But what's going on over here? How did this become the most famous Jewish prayer? How did this become the opening to Yom Kippur? What is the meaning behind it? Now, before we get to fully unpacking it, let's go to another interesting statement. As an introduction to the Kol Nidrei, there are two lines that are read by the entire community together, and that is with permission of the omnipresent and permission of the congregation in the heavenly assembly and earthly assembly, we hereby grant permission to pray with sinners. And this is supposed to be an introduction to the Kol Nidrei, and is also saying beautifully. But again, what's going on over here? Why would we start Yom Kippur with asking for permission to pray with the sinners? And what does it have to do with anything going on over here? So without looking at any of the translation, the words sound beautiful. The tunes are amazing. But once we start to look at it, what is actually happening? So there's a commentary known as the Mordechai, or Mordechai, the son of Hillel, who lived in the 13th century, towards the end of the 13th century, middle and end of the 13th century, in Nuremberg, Germany, where he was killed, murdered during one of the massacres there in the year 1298. And he explains as follows: before we start to pray on Yom Kippur, we stand in front of God, asking for atonement, asking for forgiveness. It's only right that those who have been excommunicated by the community, and many times rightfully so, to allow them to come back and join us for prayers. You see, during the medieval times, the worst thing a community can do to somebody was excommunicate them if it was really dire circumstances. And unfortunately, it happened from time to time. One of the results of being excommunicated would be the person couldn't count as part of the minyan. They couldn't take part of communal events. And before standing in front of God, we would want to take away that barrier that stands between us in order to stand in front of God, like children standing in front of their parents. We stand in front of God, our parent, in order to ask for forgiveness and atonement. It's only right that we all stand together as one. So we abolish that excommunication. And that's why we have to request, based on the heavenly assembly and the earthly assembly, that we can all pray together, the sinners and saints alike. Now, one of the concepts behind this is the Talmud tells us that when it comes to a fast day, a day that the community has to fast in order to bring about, let's say, if there's a certain suffering going on, if there's a plague, if there's a pandemic, if there's a hunger, or anything of the like, as discussed in the Talmud, at what point does it, what's the criteria for instituting a public fast day for the community? It says that if the fast day doesn't have everybody in the community, which means the saints and the sinners, it's not complete. We know because the community without the sinners is not a complete community. As one of the commentaries, Rabbeinu Bachye Ibn Pekuda, from the 1200s explains, says, because you don't understand how much God enjoys when the sinner changes their ways. When the saints do what they're supposed to do, when the righteous do what they're supposed to do, there's nothing novel about it. But when the sinner changes his ways, that is enjoyable for God. But it's not just that. It's also our responsibility to help the sinner find their way back. You see, because as long as we're not helping them find their way back, we're equally part of the problem. It's our responsibility. And therefore, the prayer starts off with requesting permission that we pray with the sinner. But now, is it just to pray with the sinner as in just for the day? Here's a 24-hour period where we can pray together, but then we're not going to look at you again after? Is this just a temporary thing? Or is this a pure renunciation of the sinner's ban? And there's actually a dispute, like all good things in Judaism. But without getting too deep into it, our custom is, as depicted here, is that the Chazan stands in front of the shul, and two men pull out the Sifrei Torah, two Torah scrolls, and they stand next to him. Together, the three of them form a Jewish court of law. And by them forming this court of law, they're not just making a nice proclamation or a nice idea, but rather they are giving a halachic ruling that the sinner's ban be completely annulled, not just for this 24 hours, but from here forward. But it's specifically during these 25 hours, really, of Yom Kippur, that one would want to tap into that. As Rabbi Yoel Sirkis, known as the Bach, from the 16th and 17th century, Krakow, explains as follows. He says, you see, we refer to the evil inclination or the evil angel as Hasatan, the Satan in English. Now, the word Hasatan, which is the cause of all of our failures, besides for our responsibility in it, but the one who gets us tripped up. You see, the numerical value of the word Hasatan in Hebrew, so Hey, Sin, Tes, and Nun, is 364. We know that the year, the solar year is 365 days. That means 364 days a year. The Satan has the ability to rule and have his way. However, there's one day a year where the Satan has no dominion, and that is on Yom Kippur. And therefore, we start off Yom Kippur with allowing the sinners to pray with the saints because we bring down all the barriers. What separates between a saint and a sinner is the Satan. But on this day, saint and sinner are alike. And therefore, we break down those barriers so we can stand together in front of God, our Master, our King, our Father in heaven, and can ask for atonement and forgiveness. Now, at this point, I'd also like to, let's get back to Kol Nidrei. This was just the opening statements before Kol Nidrei of Aldas HaMakim. But let's get back to Kol Nidrei. Let's discuss its origin. You see, there is a little bit of a myth that the Kol Nidrei prayer, which, like we said, is taking away that ban between the saints and the sinners, came from the Marranos, or the crypto Jews as they're known, during the Spanish Inquisition in 1492. And really, this process started way before 1492. It was just in 1492 when Ferdinand and Isabel decided that it's time for the Jews to go and be burnt at the stake, at the Ara de Fe. So many want to say that the Kol Nidrei prayer actually came from those fleeing the Inquisition, because we know what happened during the time of the Inquisition, and before that, Jews were forcibly being converted to Christianity, or it meant death, and some ran away. So you see, the Jews who stayed and became what is known as the Marranos, or the crypto Jews, on the outside, they gave up their Judaism. They bowed to the cross. They proclaimed that they belonged to the church and no longer to God and the shul. But on the inside and in their homes and in their privacy of their own lives, they would continue to act like Jews. But when they would come together with other Jews who were putting their lives on the line to live openly as a Jew and not accept the church, there was a little bit of a rift, a little bit of a split in the synagogue. We're the ones putting our lives on the line to live openly as a Jew, and you getting the easy way out by living openly as a Christian. And therefore, they would open up with this prayer that Kol Nidrei, all the vows that we made throughout the year, referring to bowing down to the cross, proclaiming that I'm giving up my Judaism. Let me be annulled from all of that all those statements and vows be annulled as if I never made them, because my heart truly lies in the shul with God, with my people. This is a beautiful concept, and I'm sure the Maranas found deep solace in this prayer. However, they were not the ones to come up with this prayer. You see, the first place that we find this prayer was already in the times of the Gaonim. The Gaonic eras who we're talking about in the 9th and 10th century, in the siddhars that were being compiled then, had the Kol Nidrei inscribed there already. So at least 500 years, 600 years before the Maranas, the Kol Nidrei was already an accepted part of the siddhar, already accepted part of the Yom Kippur service. In addition, the earliest source that we have for the concept of Kol Nidrei, the concept of annulling the vows, is in the Zohar. And the Zohar writes as follows: there are those who are subject to an unfavorable decree in the matter of vows and oaths. For them it was enacted to say Kol Nidrei, any oaths or abstention, they should all be absolved and nullified. You see, the Zohar, which was authored by Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai in the times of the Mishnah, in the times of the Roman Empire, already discusses this concept of saying Kol Nidrei, because we know how seriously the Torah takes vows. You see, Yom Kippur, the Day of Judgment, where we're going to stand in front of God and ask for atonement, we need to make sure that we've actually atoned for our sins. You see, that's why the Talmud tells us Yom Kippur only helps for sins between man and God, not between man and another man. Because if it's between you and another person, you have to fix the problem. You have to make amends. If there's something you can do about it, you must do something about it. You must go to that other person, ask for forgiveness from them, not from God. Because it is in this case that you need their forgiveness, not God's forgiveness. If you can owe them money, if you need to repent by making amends and paying them back or something like that, you have to take action. You can't just stand in shul for 25 hours in Yom Kippur. It's not going to help. Yom Kippur is mainly between man and God. However, when it comes to the atonement that we can ask between man and God, that's only for missed opportunities or bad decisions of the past. But if we have any outstanding balances, such as any vows or oaths that we made that we haven't followed through yet, but we still have the opportunity, how can we stand in front of God and ask for atonement or forgiveness when there's still action that we can take to correct the wrong? And we know how seriously the Torah takes vows. There's a clear verse in the Torah, in the book of Numbers, Lo yachal devaro, he shall not violate his word, which means a person should not treat his word as being unholy, because words in Judaism are sacred. If you say something, you must follow through with it. You can't just get away because it's non-contractual. I'm not bound by it. The Torah says no. To the point that in the Sefer HaAruch, we find Sefer HaAruch was written by Rabbi Nassan ben Yechiel of Rome in the 11th century. Writes a very interesting story, how there was once a woman who fell into a well. A man passed by, she could not get out, and she was screaming for help. A man passed by and says, "What's the problem here?" She says, "I'm stuck." So he says, "Are you a demon or are you a person?" Apparently demons were common in those days. And she says, "I'm a person." So he says, "If that's the case, if I help you out of the well, will you marry me?" She says, "Of course I will." He helps her out. They make an oath, and they both go back to their respective towns, and they make up a time that, he would come visit her in a couple of months, and they get married. Meanwhile, he goes back to his town and gets busy with work and completely forgets about her. On the other hand, in her life, she's being offered different men to marry, but she says no to each one because of the oath that was made at the well. Meanwhile, he completely forgets about her. Several months later, he ends up marrying a woman. She gets pregnant, and they have a baby. And tragedy strikes. At 3 months old, the baby is choked by a weasel. Horrific. After recovering from this, she gets pregnant again and has a second baby. This time, the toddler fell into a well and died. Tragedy strikes again. The woman says to her husband, and she says, if these were natural deaths that were common, I wouldn't question you. But these are supernatural. What's going on over here? And he recalls the oath that he made to the other woman, and he tells his wife about it. And his wife says, I would like a divorce from you, because you made the oath to her, you owe it to her. It is not right for me to continue to live with you. I don't want you to stay here anymore. And so he does. He gives a get, and he goes to find this other woman. He betroths her, and they build a beautiful family. And he concludes in this story, he says, this is what God says, my eyes are upon the faithful of the land to dwell with me. It's extremely important for us to keep our word, to keep our oath, to keep our vows. And therefore, when it comes the day of judgment to stand in front of God, based on this Zohar, it's understandable that one would not want to be standing with any oaths or vows between them and God. And therefore, we start off with the Kol Nidrei. This is a nice answer, a nice concept. But what is lacking here is, okay, we understand why one should come into Yom Kippur without vows, without any oaths, but why the stirring declaration right before the start of Yom Kippur? It can be done in private the morning before. That's first of all. Second of all, we already have a custom that we do similar concept called Hataras Nedarim, the morning before Rosh Hashanah. Seemingly that should have taken care of the issue. And again, this doesn't explain why this becomes the focal point of what Yom Kippur is all about. Another issue when looking at the Kol Nidrei, you see, in the original text of the Yom Kippur, there seems to be an inconsistency. Are we talking about oaths from the previous year, or are we talking about oaths for the year ahead? Now, this is highly debated in Jewish law as to the exact text of the Kol Nidrei. Are we referring to last year's oaths? So is it from last Yom Kippur until this year Yom Kippur? Or is it the coming year's oaths, which would be from this Yom Kippur until the next Yom Kippur? In our Nusach and the Chabad Nusach, we have from this year till next year. In other sects, in other liturgy, you'll find a different text. But what most of the opinions come to is that it's not a very legally binding text when it comes to saying the Kol Nidrei. And if that's the case, once again, that just begs to ask, what is the purpose of this prayer of Kol Nidrei? And why is it so powerful? And ideas like this. You see, when it comes to the Jewish calendar, let's just look at Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur as a seamless flow. As we know, it's called the 10 days of repentance, 10 days of tshuva, that starts in the first day of Rosh Hashanah and concludes on Yom Kippur. And the idea is like this. Comes Rosh Hashanah, and God says, you know what, I'm willing to leave the entire last year behind. No matter how good it was, no matter how bad it was. Let's start this year fresh, from new. Accept me as your king. We stand in shul all day in Rosh Hashanah. We blow the shofar. And the idea is we're saying, God, we're committed to you. You're committed to us. Let's start this new year off completely fresh, completely clean. We're committed. God says, good. Comes Yom Kippur, and God says, you know what? Let's work out all the little kinks that we had from the year before. Why last year may have had certain faults. Now that we're both committed again, we can work it out together. And God says, let's do this over Yom Kippur. That's what the Day of Atonement is. It's not atonement that just go here, take whatever you want, and you're off the hook. God's saying, no, I'm letting you off the hook. but because now we're going to sit down and we're going to figure out our differences and we're going to come to some kind of conclusion, some kind of solutions. But the problem is, when the day of Yom Kippur starts, we have a clean slate, a perfectly clean, pristine slate. Last year's baggage is yesterday's news. It no longer exists. The problem is, you see, whenever people try to change, do better, turn a new page, turn a new leaf, create a new life for themselves, one of the things that weigh us down the most, one of the greatest obstacles are the stories we tell ourselves. I'm not really different than I was last year. I'm not really a new person. I'm not really a different person. I'm not really the original pristine soul that I originally came down as. I can't get away from that. I don't deserve to live such a good life. I'm not able to live such a good life. I'm not so talented. I'm not so great. And it's these narratives which we create that we end up living by. We're self-fulfilling prophets. And there's no way that we can tap into what Yom Kippur is all about, carrying all of these stories. So we start off the day with Kol Nidrei, and we say all of these vows and oaths and consecrations, all of these stories that I tell myself about myself, all of the stories that other people tell about me, or all of the stories that I concoct in my mind that other people are telling about me. We have to get rid of these ideas and these notions first. We have to be able to separate ourselves from that, the traumas of the past, to be able to grow past them and recognize none of that defines me. None of that makes me who I am today. And therefore, I can actually be a clean person today, starting off pure and pristine without any of these problems. I have the power to grow past them. I have the power to be bigger than them. The question is, do I truly believe that? It's a fascinating insight. You see, when the day of Yom Kippur is over, after we pray the fifth prayer of the day, the Ne'ilah, the closing prayer, right away, we daven Ma'ariv, the evening services. And in the Shemona Esrei, in the Amidah, one of the blessings there is, we say, Slach lanu avinu, we say, God, forgive us. What's going on over here? We just spent the past 25 hours in shul, 5 prayers. We confessed 9 times, and every time of the 9 times that we confess, there are 44 details within that confession, plus more. And now we're asking God to forgive us right away. What do you mean? God just forgave us. And Kippur just ended. We are completely atoned. As the Gemara tells us, the day of Yom Kippur itself atones for us. As long as we fast, we've been atoned for. So why are we asking for forgiveness? You know, it would be one thing if we were praying Ma'ariv after we ate. As you know, some people, right, when the fast is over, they're running and they're eating, they're fasting, they're pushing people out of the way. Okay, so you need to ask for forgiveness because you've given in to an animal instinct. But we're talking about going straight from Ne'ilah to Ma'ariv. What are we asking forgiveness for? There's a fascinating insight that I saw. It says what we're asking for forgiveness is we're saying, God, forgive me that I don't believe that you forgave me. You see, the greatest sin that we can do sometimes is not believe in the fact that we've been forgiven. Not to not believe in ourselves, that we can actually grow past that and be bigger than that and not defined by it. And that's why we start off the Yom Kippur davening and the opening of the day. You want to tap into the power of the day? Shed those stories. Let them go back. You see, it's the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves, and it's the stories that we tell ourselves about our relationships with other people, with God. You see, sometimes in order to be able to really tap into it, you have to be able to transcend what's going on around you. But if you're lugging around everything of your history, every mistake you've ever made, and not believing that you can actually be bigger than all of that, there is no way that we can grow forward. There's no way that Yom Kippur can be as meaningful and as powerful as it could be and as it should be. It's like they tell the story of the man who was once walking, and He's carrying a huge burden on his back. And somebody rides by on a wagon. And he says, "Excuse me, sir, where are you heading?" He says, "To the next town." He says, "I'm also. Why don't you hop into the wagon?" He says, "Okay." He hops in, and he's holding his burden on top of his back. And the wagon keeps going. The wagon driver turns around and says, "Take your burden off. The wagon can hold it." We don't believe that God is actually absolving us. God is actually atoning for us and accepting our sincerity to move forward and to break free of the stories we tell ourselves, about other people, our relationships, and our connection to God. It's like they tell the classic joke, but it's a little bit of a spin on the classic joke. I thank my sister-in-law Leah for telling it to me. And it goes as follows. Why did the chicken cross the road? And the answer is because the farmer told him he was a joke. And that's the story of our lives so much of the time. Somebody says something about us. We say something about ourselves, or it's even an action that we actually took and we've done it. But we don't let up. We continue to define ourselves by it. And all that does is chain us down. Instead of realizing there's a potential for growth, you just have to let go. And this is what the Alter Rebbe in Mequon Torah gives an insight to what Yom Kippur is all about. Yom Kippur is all about breaking free. And that's why we start off with the Kol Nidrei, the vows. These vows are what tie us down and don't allow us to break free and grow and move forward. And in order to tap into the day, we must start with the Kol Nidrei. I'd like to just conclude with a story, a powerful story about Kol Nidrei. There was, a few years ago, there was a businessman named Moshe. His last name's Rosenfeld. He lives in Eretz Yisrael, and it was pre-COVID where flights between Israel and Germany were a non-issue. He was a businessman. Following Rosh Hashanah, he takes a business trip to Frankfurt, Germany, and he's supposed to leave the day before Yom Kippur. Something happens. He couldn't make the flight. He had to stay in Germany another day. But staying in Germany, in Frankfurt, another day meant staying there for Yom Kippur. It would be his first time out of Eretz Yisrael for Yom Kippur, his first time not with his family, and his first time not going to his regular shul, having his regular seat, listening to the regular chazan that he's used to for Yom Kippur. So he's broken by it. He's not happy. He comes to shul, the great shul in Frankfurt, standing there since before World War II, miraculously. Then he's sitting in the back. He finds himself a spot. And the chazan starts, Kol Nidrei, and it's a stirring Kol Nidrei. Starts off slowly, low voice, low tone. And it gets louder and louder and louder. And as the chazan goes, the chazan breaks down crying in the middle, gathers himself back, continues with the stirring tunes. At the end of the services, this Moshe is completely inspired. He never heard a service like that, a Kol Nidrei like that in his life. So, service is over. He has nowhere to run. Nobody's waiting for him. What he's going to do, go back to his hotel. He sees the chazan. He goes over to him and he says, "I just want to thank you for that Kol Nidrei, but I can tell there was something special about it. What's your story?" So this chazan, his name is Tzaddik Greenwald. Tzaddik Greenwald is from Eretz Yisrael. He's the child to Holocaust survivors. And he says that ever since he got into being able to be a chazan, he would come back every single year for Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur to this great shul in Frankfurt because of what the shul, the power that it represents, that it withstood the Holocaust, it withstood World War II, and to pray there on behalf of all those souls, the 6 million. And the fact that Judaism is still alive today says it's very meaningful for him. So he makes sure to come back every year, Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, he's chazan there. So he says, one year, after Yom Kippur was over, it was a long Yom Kippur. Sorry. So after Yom Kippur was over, he's the last one to leave. Everybody else already left. He's closing up the shul. He's tired. There are two people who work on Yom Kippur. That's the rabbi and the cantor. And the cantor works much harder than any rabbi in Yom Kippur. The entire time from beginning to end of Yom Kippur, singing away, can't take a drink, thirsty, hungry, tired, standing there all day. He closes up the shul. He's on his way out. And he hears banging at the front gates of the shul. He comes to the gates. And he sees an old man there, wearing a white yarmulke, a white shirt. And the man starts screaming in Yiddish with a Russian, German, Yiddish accent. And the man is saying, "Why are the lights off? Where is everybody? Why are the gates locked? Tonight is Yom Kippur. I'm here for the services. What's going on over here?" So Tzaddik is very tired, and he realizes something's off over here, and he says, "What's going on?" He says, "I'm here for the services. Let's go." Tzaddik doesn't have the heart to tell the man, that was last night. You're 25 hours too late. Tzaddik opens up the gate, and he tells him in a very soft way, and it breaks the news to him. He says, "I'm sorry, but that was last night." The man breaks down in tears, crying. He says, "You don't understand." He says, "I grew up here. My parents were Holocaust survivors, completely assimilated. They gave up on Judaism after the Holocaust, understandably. Can't blame them. But there's one thing that my father taught me. He says, you're a Jew, and a Jew goes to Kol Nidrei every single year, no matter what. And that's how you know you're a Jew." And the man breaks down crying. He says, "I completely lost my Jewish identity. I completely lost my identity. I missed Kol Nidrei this year." Broken. So Tzaddik realizes his food can wait. He says, "You know what? Come with me." He brings the man into the shul, turns on the lights, puts on his hat and his robe for being the Chazan, and he says, "Tonight, you, me, and God are going to pray together." He says he stands up there, gives the man a machzor, and he starts to Kol Nidrei. He says it was the first time since he became a Chazan that he realized there's no president of the shul to impress, there's no crowd to impress, his job's not on the line. He doesn't need to worry about anybody else. As a Chazan, that's what many of the Chazanim are thinking about. I want to make sure people like me, my insecurities. He realizes none of that right now. He's actually able to stare God in the face and sing the Kol Nidrei. And he says it stirred him. It just woke him up in a way like he's never felt in his life. At the conclusion of the services, an old man turns to the Chazan and says, "Thank you so much. You don't know what you've done for me. You've given me my life back." You see, the same thing is that we go through. So Tzaddik tells this Moshe, this businessman, he says, "This is what Kol Nidrei means to me every year. I just think back to that moment." You see, we live our lives in a way that we're constantly living our lives based on the stories that we tell ourselves or others say about us, or based on the world around us, based on the stories that others want us to tell, based on the mistakes that we've made. But how often do we actually stop for a moment, step away from all of that, look God in the face, and shed all of those layers, shed those chains, break those chains? So I bless us all that when we stand Kol Nidrei, all of those barriers shall be broken. We find our true selves, and way before that, we should merit the coming of Mashiach, when the true chains and shackles of Galus will be broken, a world where there's no more pain and suffering, speedily in our times, even before Yom Kippur.